I would recommend to be very consistent with the preparation. So start early. You do not have to do, let's say, 100 questions every week. If you only do, let's say, 10 odd questions per day, that is good enough for you. Regardless of you coming from a background or not, you will have to be consistent on a daily basis, which is to say that you do not try to allocate 1 day per week to CSAT. I would recommend breaking it down into smaller targets for every day throughout the week, which could mean that even if you solve around 5 to 10 odd questions per day, that is good enough practice for you. I would recommend to give a lot of time to practice. Now, when I say a lot of time to practice, it does not mean solving 50 questions every day, right? Solving 10 questions every day, but mindfully.
Hello dear aspirants, welcome to Vision IAS special discussion on how to effectively prepare for CSAT 2025. So today I am joined by our esteemed faculty, Mr. Ranchan Kaul, who will discuss his valuable insights, tips and strategies to effectively prepare for CSAT 2025. So a warm welcome to you, sir.
Many thanks for having me, Ranchan.
So sir, to begin with, if you could give a brief outline of the paper CSAT itself.
All right, so CSAT is a part of preliminary examination. There are two parts to it. One is general studies. The other one is what we commonly call civil services aptitude test. There are a total of 80 questions in CSAT. Each question is worth 2.5 marks and there is a negative marking of 1/3. You have to keep in mind that this is a qualifying exam, which is to say that no matter whether you clear the cutoff in General Studies 1, if you cannot clear the cutoff in CSAT, those marks will not be accounted for. You will not be clearing this exam in that case. Right? So one thing which is also something that I have to keep in mind is that the cutoff has been pre-decided in case of CSAT. You have to score roughly around 1/3 of the questions right, which is about 67.5 is what you should be aiming at. So 1/3 is your qualifying score. Right. Apart from that, there is no specific cutoff for CSAT in any case. Yeah.
Right, sir. So, now talking about further, now that this video is particularly about the reasoning section of CSAT paper. So, if you could highlight the various topics that come under the reasoning section of CSAT paper.
Yes. So, all right, if you could look at CSAT itself, there are three main sections in CSAT. One is quantitative aptitude, the other one is logical reasoning, and the third part is reading comprehension. Now, in terms of the composition of the paper itself, if you see, this composition has evolved over the course of time. Previously, it used to be more questions on reading comprehension and the remaining questions were quantitative aptitude and logical reasoning combined. Of late, the composition has been such that reading comprehension, you will find roughly around 26 odd passages. The number of questions will vary from 26 to 28 odd. Right? You will have 14 to 15 odd questions from logical reasoning and the remaining questions come from quantitative aptitude itself. Now, from logical reasoning itself, the most common areas that you have to focus on are dices, cubes, clocks, calendars. You also have questions based on syllogism. Then there are questions based on arrangements, be it linear arrangements, non-linear arrangements. Apart from that, one of the more common areas is inequalities that questions get asked from, blood relations. These are the few key areas that are to be taken care of in context of logical reasoning.
That was a very comprehensive list of the topics of the reasoning section, sir. So moving forward to the approach to CSAT, as we all know that CSAT has become an important hurdle in the success of this exam, and to start early is going to be key to your success. So talking about the approach particularly, sir, there is this fear factor which is hovering over the CSAT paper. So is this fear real according to you?
Well, if you ever speak to students, aspirants who want to clear this exam, quite obviously you will find that this fear is very evident. And it has become evident at least in the last 2 to 3 odd years, ever since the level of difficulty of these questions when it comes to CSAT, that has been gradually elevated by the commission itself. Now, fear is also something which is real when it comes to the kind of candidates who appear for this exam. Since UPSC invites all candidates from all backgrounds, right, you will find people who have lost touch with quantitative aptitude far back in time. So there are people who may not have had enough practice, right? And then there is an exam in the UPSC civil service examination which you have to necessarily clear. Right. That creates some sense of fear psychosis amongst the aspirants. So it is quite real, but this fear is also associated with two things I would reckon. I think one of them would be the lack of practice. Another would be with respect to the level of difficulty of the questions.
Right, sir. So you talked about difficulty of the paper and as well as the practice, which again varies depending on the kind of backgrounds the students come from. So moving on to how to again tackle this whole situation of increased difficulty as well as preparing it strategically for the paper. So what was your advice to go about the CSAT paper on a whole, if you could touch upon briefly, and also reasoning?
One thing I would like to make abundantly clear to aspirants is that this fear around level of difficulty of questions in CSAT is only very recent. Right? So we have to be very careful that we do not draw patterns out of only 3 to 4 odd instances of questions being on slightly difficult side of things. Right? So that has to be kept in mind. If you look at the composition of CSAT per se, there are 3 sections. What I've noticed over the course of time is that quantitative aptitude and logical reasoning used to be on the easier side when we talk about the era 2013 onwards. Right? In the last few years, what I've seen is the commission always makes it a point that one section will be rather easy. The 2 sections could be, you can say, at best moderate level of difficulty. Yeah. Now, why students find it more challenging is also because they have either not practiced or they do not have the confidence, right, when it comes to how to tackle this exam per se. Right? A lot of people are also in a fix as to when to start for this exam. Since this is a qualifying exam, many people awaken to that reality much later. Right? So that is where your fear also stems from. If in terms of approach, you have to understand what your background is and how much prepared you are generally, or what is your mathematical aptitude in general. So these are factors that have to be considered before deciding when to start preparing for this. In either case, I would recommend to be very consistent with the preparation. So start early. You do not have to do, let's say, 100 questions every week. If you only do, let's say, 10 odd questions per day, that is good enough for you. Right? So start as early as possible, give yourself enough time to practice, right? And focus on the key areas which are asked. I think about 5 to 10 questions per day is good enough practice, which will help you see through.
Right, sir. It's a very important point you highlighted, that is, the dilemma that is with the students about when to start CSAT preparation, because many of the students, as we see, push their preparation towards the last, probably just 1 month before the exam. And this question is very pertinent of when exactly should we start. So is there parameters or factors to decide this?
Yes, the parameters, like I said, will depend upon one. They include what your educational background is. So if you are from an engineering background or a hard science background, maybe you do not require that kind of practice. Maybe you can start maybe about 2 to 3 odd months prior to the exam. That is good enough for you. But if you're somebody who comes from a background, let's say you come from a humanities background, let's say you come from a commerce background, you haven't had enough practice when it comes to aptitude-based questions, in which case I would recommend you to start a little early. Right? What I would recommend is give yourself a minimum of 6 months of preparation for sure. Now, 6 months of preparation does not have to be rigorous. Right? It has to be consistent. What I mean by that is, if you allocate 1 hour a day to solving around 10 questions a day, good enough, I would recommend. Right? So 6 months, I think, is the bare minimum that you should be allotting to CSAT. On pushing it towards the very latest stages of your preparation, that has been one strategy which ends up proving fatal for many students. I know of certain candidates who come from very good educational backgrounds. In fact, some of the premier engineering colleges also, who have failed at CSAT. You would not expect them to fail, but one reason why, what I would attribute that failure to, is lack of practice. So give yourself enough time to at least make sure that you have practiced decently. Right? So I would recommend for somebody who does not have that background, I would recommend a minimum of 6 months of preparation. For somebody who has that educational background, let's say an engineering background or maybe a maths or a hard science background, I would recommend 2 to 3 months of preparation is good enough.
Right, sir. So as I can understand that not being complacent and practicing well ahead of time is going to be crucial for cracking the CSAT as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, sir, now that you have discussed when to start practicing for the CSAT paper, now it's important to understand as to how much of practice is required and how do we utilize these resources that we have to manage both GS as well as CSAT. So if you could throw light on this.
Sure. So the question can be divided into 3 parts. First is how much of practice is really required. Like I said, it is a factor of what your educational background is. Now, for somebody who comes from a humanities background, they have to start from the foundational concepts first and then get used to solving easier questions. From easier questions, you move to moderate level of difficulty questions, and if time permits, they can even try difficult questions. For somebody who comes from, let's say, an engineering background, that person may not require to go back to foundational concepts first. They can straight up start from preparing, let's say, moderate level of difficulty questions. Right? In terms of how much practice is required, honestly, there is no set answer to that question. But what I can say is that this preparation, whatever the extent to which whatever extent you go to when it comes to preparation, you have to be a little more consistent with it. That means regardless of you coming from a background or not, you will have to be consistent on a daily basis, which is to say that you do not try to allocate 1 day per week to CSAT. I would recommend breaking it down into smaller targets for every day throughout the week, which could mean that even if you solve around 5 to 10 odd questions per day, that is good enough practice for you. Right? Ideally, how do you go about it? I would recommend you to have monthly targets. The monthly target could be one big section or two big sections. Divide those big sections into smaller subsections and have weekly targets on those bases. So you start from foundational concepts, right? Keep 2 days for foundational concepts, then move to questions. Questions could start from easy level of difficulty questions, move to moderate level of difficulty questions, and from there, if time permits, you may also go for difficult questions in general, right? So I would recommend not more than 1 hour per day, right? 1 hour per day is good enough.
So that was a very systematic plan of how to go about the practice. So coming back to resources, what resources we have to prepare, especially the reasoning section of CSAT? If you could throw light on that.
Surely. So if you look at logical reasoning per se, right, where do you find resources for logical reasoning? Firstly, you'll have to create a framework within which you'll have to operate. Since these are topics over which you can have very, very difficult questions to and very easy questions to, first thing is to understand what is this broad framework within which I have to operate. In which case, previous year's question papers come in handy. So have a look at previous year's question papers, try to see what kind of questions have they been asking, right? You cannot, if you are somebody who is not prepared for logical reasoning, you cannot look at a question and decide for yourself whether it's a difficult question or an easy question. So what you can do is, you can have your classrooms. From your classrooms, you will get basic foundational concepts, basic frameworks to work with. Then look at previous year's question papers and analyze what kind of questions have they been asking. That gives you a broad framework to operate within. Right. From there onwards, you only have to focus on one, classroom notes, second, classroom based questions, and in addition, select any question bank. I would recommend go for a banking question bank. I would recommend in terms of level of difficulty, you do not have to go CAT level of difficulty clearly. At best, this resembles a banking exam. Right. So I would recommend having a question bank that is concerning any banking logical reasoning questions. Right. That is good enough for you. Right. So from there onwards, only try to solve questions. And if you get stuck in any question, try to look at its explanation. So long as you are able to understand the explanation, I would think that your preparation is good enough. It's a problem only when you cannot even understand the explanation. That is when the real problem starts, and which is when you can get in touch with your mentors and also with your teachers.
Right, sir. So you talked about, taking feedback from your mentors, as well as, understanding the explanation of these resources that you talked about. And an important thing that you highlighted was the framework. So the framework is previous year question papers, where you need to understand what is the range of the difficulty of the questions. So now coming to some previous year question papers, how does one go about analyzing them, or how do we incorporate the previous year question papers into our preparations? If you could just highlight some sort of strategy on this.
So like I said, going back to your previous year's question papers will help you in many ways. The first way is in terms of understanding whether the composition of this exam has changed or not. Right? If the number of questions which comes from reading comprehension part, have they increased, have they decreased? The number of questions from logical reasoning, have they increased, have they decreased? The number of questions from quantitative aptitude, have they increased or have they decreased? One pattern that you would notice is reading comprehension certainly has declined. If you look at logical reasoning part, that has by and large remained stable, which is somewhere around 15 to 20 questions you can expect from logical reasoning part itself. Second, you can say function of previous year's question papers would be to understand the level of difficulty. Now, level of difficulty you will understand only if you understand the fundamental concepts, right? So once you are done with your classes, look at, for each topic, look at previous year's question papers, try to scan through these papers and find the questions that are relevant to the topic which has been studied in the class itself. That will give you a basic understanding of what kind of difficulty to expect. Now, having said that, you have to be mindful that it may not be the same level of difficulty next year also, but it gives you a rather basic framework to operate within. Right. Apart from that, I would say previous year's question papers would also help you probably practice closer to the exam itself. Right. So, ideally, I recommend people to start with previous year's question papers in terms of getting a hang of what kind of questions you can expect, right? And then work your way up with the question bank. But closer to the time of exam, you can also, once again, you can say solve a particular year's question paper, right? To see whether you can solve that paper in time or not. So that is also one of the functions of previous year question papers.
So, sir, very beautifully summarized on how to, utilize the previous year question papers for preparation. Sir, now that we understand that we need to start early, we need to strategize for cracking the CSAT, considering all these factors that we have discussed. So, any final words of advice for the students who are preparing for 2025?
Yes, what I would recommend everybody is that you need to understand that when it comes to quantitative aptitude, logical reasoning, or CSAT in general, one thing that you cannot skip is practice. Right? You may be fearful, you may be underconfident, but the only thing which is going to make you confident or make you fearless is practice. So focus on the preparation part, focus on the practice part so much more. Do not go in thinking that I will only read about these concepts, I will only look at people solving these questions and that will help me. Right? I would recommend to give a lot of time to practice. Now, when I say a lot of time to practice, it does not mean solving 50 questions every day, right? Solving 10 questions every day, but mindfully, right? If you get stuck in a question, do not be fearful. Do not think that, your all of your practice has gone to waste. No, right? There are some questions which could be challenging. Look at their explanations. If you can understand the explanations, you are good to go, right? It's only consistent practice which is going to keep you very confident and which is going to keep your head stable. If you push it towards the fag end of your preparation, that is when most of the challenges of aspirants start, right? Which is when those aspirants, especially who do not have this kind of background, this is when they start to lose their confidence completely. So one word of advice from me would be to start early, to remain very consistent, right? And to always practice. That's about it.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your valuable insights and comprehensive strategies for effectively preparing for CSAT 2025.
Thanks, Ramakant. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, sir. So, dear students, I hope this session was insightful, and considering the comprehensive strategies shared by sir, I hope you start early, practice well, and stay motivated. All the very best for your preparation.